Good morning and welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center, sponsored by Fieldstone Memory Care, Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone offers innovative and compassionate care. Now accepting residents. Call 360-689-4314 to schedule a tour of Fieldstone's beautifully appointed apartments on their beautiful property in Rolling Bay. And this is our monthly meeting with one of our favorite people that, sometimes we pretty much always agree with them. And sometimes I'm a little with him, but we love you, David Harrison. Thank you so much for being with us again today.
Let me recognize the appearance on our screen of a former City of Winslow councilman. Or Charlie, did you switch over to the COBI, or were you were before that happened, weren't you?
I was in the City of Winslow, and I was on the council that voted to annex the rest of the island, and then I was re-elected to the Bainbridge Island City Council.
Oh my goodness! So some of us were around in those halcyon days, including myself.
Yep.
So folks, as you know, my practice is to divide into three parts and to do some stopping in between, so we're all on the same page with each other. It's turned out that it's funny, going back to the beginning, I assumed that we would have some people on this discussion that would go on every end of the political spectrum, and we've fallen into and I wouldn't say fallen into, we've understood that none of us is a deep defender of Mr. Trump, but if it ever turns out that someone is, hopefully they can parry whatever I'm saying at that time. I want to talk a little bit about what's new right now, because it could seem like we're in the same political month over and over again, but there has been a profound change, and I want to talk about it. So we're in an all-new zone with regard to what's happening with Stop the Steal and Stop the Steal, and an all-new zone with regard to the related Republican election strategy, and an all-new zone with regard to what we can do about it, what opportunities it gives for us this upcoming November. So first we'll go with Stop the Steal itself. Second, with the adjustments in the Republican election strategy and the huge battle between McConnell and Trump over what that strategy should be and the advantages to us. And then I want to close with some errors on that Democrats have been making that we should be on the alert for, and be against, actually. So first, in previous months, we've talked about the formula for doing well this year, even though there are a lot of pundits out there saying that it's preordained that we're not going to do well in November. And it's certainly no cakewalk, or nothing you would want to predict as a certainty. What I've been saying, as you know, is that if by summer the economy is doing what it's expected to do, if we're in a new era with the COVID, where we're feeling like we're kind of at the end of the worst part of the pandemic, that Biden will get some credit that he's not presently receiving, and that his ratings, which are already 10 points above Trump's, even though they're only in the 40s, will get better, and that will help our senatorial candidates and our House candidates this fall. I think we're also seeing that there's quite possibly going to be some version of Build Back Better in the next 3-4 weeks. And we're seeing Biden showing leadership both in the Syria attack on the ISIS official and on Russia. Americans respond well to global leadership. So I think it's possible that we'll get a boost from all those things. nonetheless, we should glory on the boost that the Republicans are handing to us, that would not necessarily be the case were it not for Trump's unsurpassed narcissism. That is, the man never was able to or willing to accept having lost, and he is willing to damage his party in his ongoing quest for to right the wrong that he's making up. So that's turned out to be a good thing. You know, we have all these discussions about what we could get on climate change and this and that, none of which we would be having if Mitch had 52 senators, which he should have had if they had won on January 5th in Georgia, which they didn't. And the reason they didn't was not insignificantly related to Trump contesting the actions of the Republican Secretary of State and Governor Brian Kemp. So we should be grateful for that. The all new zone has to do with the escalation of that battle over Trump never accepting and pretending, not only pretending that he didn't lose, but basically planning a coup to overthrow the United States government. So this is the year that we get to talk about that a lot. And so first, let's talk about the nature of Stop the Steal, and then we'll go back to the related Republican election strategy. It's important to remember with regard to Stop the Steal itself, that the committee for January 6th is not just about the insurrection. If you look at the first thing to remember is we've had lots of instances in the last 4 years where Congress issued subpoenas or tried to gather information, and they were trumped. They were blocked by Trump, and to this day, federal prosecutors, federal and states attorneys are just now looking at Trump's tax fraud because it took so long to get the records. It's not that way with January 6th testimony. These are real, we will put your posterior in jail subpoenas. For most of the people getting subpoenaed, there is no chance that the court, Supreme or otherwise, is going to say that those are improperly issued subpoenas. There might be a few people here and there that can try and claim privilege for a discussion they had with the president, but a lot of people who receive those subpoenas cannot. And they can get federal charges and they can be jailed until they comply with the subpoena. Also, there's a whole bunch of those folks that want to be subpoenaed. Turns out, communications director, not during the tail end, Stephanie Grissom is saying, come on down. There's a number of Pence staff as well that seem at this point in their lives to be sorely desiring to tell the truth as they see it. Even so far, you know, just getting subpoenaed records tells us that which of those two foxhole hosts wrote Trump staff on January 5th and said he didn't want to hear any more Stop the Steal talk, and that from that point on that they should move forward. At any rate, if you look at the 70 subpoenas, you see three categories. You see a whole bunch of people being subpoenaed over what happened on the 6th. And what they're doing there is they're trying to establish a direct link between Trump, the people who were in the war room at the Willard Hotel, and the insurrection at the Capitol. So it's not beyond belief that Merrick Garland could file charges against Trump on all that. And that's one big part of the committee wants to know not only what the role Trump had in the planning of the insurrection, but they want to embarrass him with regard to the fact that he sat there all afternoon and watched the people being pummeled and giggling about it. So that's one, you could have that be the whole investigation, but it's not. All these disclosures about he was going to seize voting machines and so forth, most of them are coming from the committee itself. The committee is broadly looking at the relationship between January 6th and the broader effort to have a coup. So that's extremely interesting that they're looking at that. And number three, very notably, they issued 10 or 20 subpoenas with regard to fake electors. So this turns out to be a major part of what the January 6th committee is doing. So in several of the states, prior to January 6th, the Trump team had a plan for people to assemble and falsely claim that they were the second electoral slate. However, you have to have some basis for doing that, or you're acting fraudulently. So there was a case, and I guess it was Hawaii 40 years ago, where there were two slates and Congress had to figure it out. This was nothing like that. These were made up slates, and in at least a couple of the states, they hedged their bets and they said, we are the slate if the court ever determines that this was a fraudulent election and different electors are needed, we're it. So, but in several of the states, they just declared themselves electors, and the lawyers on the committee and Merrick Garland, I'm sure, are thinking that those were fraudulent acts. So there's a lot of great activity that could lead up to a Merrick Garland charge. But at any rate, for us electorally, all year long, Benny Thompson and that committee and Liz Cheney, bless her conservative soul, are going to help us out by keeping this ever present in our minds. And the thing to remember about this is, just like so much of what is true of Trump, basically from 2018 on, if he has to choose between getting adulation and blind adherence from his fading base and saying something that might appeal to an independent voter somewhere, he's going to choose the former. And the trouble with all this stuff that he's doing for Mitch is, on the one hand, is it bleeds independence. On the other hand, the other trouble is it suppresses the votes of Trump's base. That's what allegedly or is thought to have happened in Georgia. The more, if Trump talks all year long about you can't, it's rigged, it's rigged, it's rigged, then that doesn't have to be any, it could be 5% of the people who still believe that he's an actual legitimate human being. But 5% could cost you an election in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, Florida, Pennsylvania. So this is very concerning for Mitch. So I'll stop for a minute and we'll see if we have any questions or thoughts about Benny Thompson's committee and what's going on, and what the subpoenas are and so forth. And then I'll go on to the war between Mitch and Trump. Any thoughts on where we stand in terms of what the committee's coming up with? Remember, disclosures about seizing voting machines, disclosures about election fraud, about fraudulent creation of alternative electors, big disclosures coming up with regard to who related to the White House was working with who related to the insurrection to get the assault on the Capitol. So it will be a pretty exciting time. Reed, you're muted.
Yes, I'm asking this question, which is, I wonder if, given, I know that there's a lot of push against the Republicans who are anti-Trumpers, like Liz Cheney, But are there any indications that there are movements to try to, that there's any pattern where we're going to see a break in the Republican Party where they're going to try to reform, or there's going to be some sort of a effort to rescue them before they totally demolish themselves?
I don't think that's the way it will look, but let me take that up. So neither party ever wants to say goodbye to any meaningful percentage of its participants. So say you could prove that, I mean, 70% of American adults don't want Trump to run again. And let it be said that we could be in a world of trouble in terms of who runs America if, say DeSantis were elected president in 2024, but at least he's an actual human being rather than a malevolent cyborg like Trump. But at any rate, we're not out of the woods if Trump fades away. But there's a reason why that party can't reformulate itself and won't, is because it would make it a permanent minority. There just aren't enough Republicans if you take one part of them and say goodbye to the other part of them. That is just technically, they want to move the party over. Mitch thinks they can win being who they are if they just stop the steal, just because traditionally the off party wins off your election. So he'd have it be about Democrats spending a lot or whatever, and run a relatively non-political political effort in the fall. There are no meaningful Republican leaders who want to split, but I've noted in my blog that the Republican Accountability Project, which is Republicans, is a lot stronger than the Lincoln Project in terms of organizing Republicans. They're the ones that did Trump lost billboards. They're less snarky than the Lincoln Project and less self-referential. And so there's that, but you don't even get Larry Hogan, the governor of Maryland, or anybody, Charlie Baker, Massachusetts. They would steer clear of those folks. And the reason, to make a long story short, is it's a recipe for certain defeat for that party to tell Trumpites that they're not part of the party. What happens in Republican primaries is they're all winner-take-all primaries, and you can win them, as Trump did in 2016, with 30% of the vote. Whereas in Democratic primaries, you get proportional wins. So Trump would have never won the nomination in 2016 with Democratic rules, but it also, that gives that much more power to 20 or 30% of the votes. Other questions, and then I'll go to the specific split between Mitch and Reed. Do you want to say anything back on that? I kind of wandered there.
Oh, well, it sounds like it's just a death grip. If to the extent that Trump continues to challenge the truth of reality, it's going to just whittle away eventually at the electability of Republicans. But I mean, outside of the fact that they're trying to change the voting rules in all these states.
I think, you go back to George W. Bush, they had a strategy with changing American demographics to get 95% of the 54% of the people that would vote for them. So they had a strategy to do very well with a limited number of people who were interested in them. As we changed demographically, that's been the strategy. We have to do very, very well with not much more than 50% of the electorate. We better do very well with independents and basically, frankly, white people. And so therefore, if we have to do that, we wouldn't mind suppressing the vote of certain other people just so 50% is a little fewer. So that has really been the strategy. The problem is, as you know, the demographic imperative is that each election, the percentage of white males is a smaller percentage of the population. And it gets harder and harder to be a conservative Republican and win. They really have to depend upon suppression and democratic mistakes. Let me note that what you could say about Al Gore and John Kerry and Hillary Clinton is that they weren't necessarily personally resonant with folks who were wanting the president to be someone that you would invite over. So that they're hoping that we don't do well, and they're hoping they can suppress the vote. But their strategy in 2012, after they lost, they did an autopsy. And what they said to each other is, we have to appeal in all new ways to Asian Americans, African Americans, Latinos, and they haven't done that. So that's why they're in such a pickle. Trump bullying and saying he won just makes it worse. Every time he does that, some Democratic strategist smiles. That's a real help. And Mitch McConnell knows that. So that goes to my second point. 2 weeks ago, a man named Mike Rounds, who's a Trump loyalist, a senator from South Dakota, issued a long statement about how Trump didn't win and how it was a fair election, and that it's time for Republicans to get over Trump not winning because he didn't win. So Trump immediately attacked him. There's no way, Mike Rounds doesn't do things like that on its own. That was a Mitch McConnell foray. The reason Mitch McConnell did that is not that Mitch McConnell bleeds every day for the decline in democracy. He may, but the specific reason he did it was he's afraid Trump doing this all summer long will suppress the November vote in the way that it suppressed the Georgia vote on January 5th of last year. So I think that's, if McConnell is worried about that, I believe him. Brown said that specifically in his statement. And what they're trying to do is get the discussion away from Stop the Steal. There's two reasons why they won't succeed in doing that. One is Trump will not agree to stop discussing Stop the Steal. And second, neither will Benny Thompson and his committee and various attorneys, including the Attorney General of District Attorney in Fulton County, Georgia. So they have a dilemma. It could turn out that our number one campaign issues for our leading Senate candidates, other than our own local politics, during the summer of this year will be the war between Mitch's candidates and Trump's candidates, and this continued effort by Trump to suppress his own vote, which is bizarre, but that's the way it's turning out. It's my thesis that all those things I was saying about Biden and the COVID waning down, the economy being strong, Biden showing that he's an adult in the room, all still stand. This is the turbocharged election if we can keep Republicans fighting all the way till the fall. And there's a good shot that we can. There are pieces of that action that are very interesting. In addition to the Republican Accountability Project, there are still projects that are trying to keep companies from donating to the 150 Republicans that voted not to accept the Electoral College results from various states. And that's that effort led by the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics of Washington, is coming along not too badly. I called for people to call in to UPS, which has lately given some money to some seditionist congressmen. That's a good thing to focus on, and I can send you those links. But most of all, I'm just saying that the Mitch Trump thing is great for Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, Wisconsin, where we have a shot. Two other notes before I stop. As you know, we didn't get the 50 votes for true Voting Rights Act stuff, and we weren't going to. And as some of you know, I'm against ending our 50 vote, the 60 vote filibuster. There's such a chance that we won't have 50 votes in the future. It's just handing Mitch power. I don't understand it. The reason why we were so adamant about doing it is we would like a federal law reining in Texas and Georgia and Arizona from limiting voting rights. They're suppressing, and we don't like that. The good news in Arizona this week is a proposed bill to allow the legislature to overturn the election results. The Republican Speaker of the House of Representatives has the power to send that to committee for review. And he sent it to all 12 committees, which means it's dead. He did that because he doesn't believe the legislature should be able to overturn the results of the voters. And similarly, no one in Wisconsin is going to hear a bill to overturn that election board either. So we're getting some Republican pushback from rank and file Republican leadership against the idea that local legislatures can overrule the certified results of the election. So that's nothing but good news. The other is Congress this year will pass the Electoral Count Act. And what that is a reform of the procedures by which the assembled Congress receives the ballots from the electors of the Electoral College, where Trump argued that the ceremonial role of the vice president could allow him to overturn the election. And there's enough Republican votes led by Rob Portman to fix that. Trump says that, well, the fact that they have to fix it means Pence did have those powers, but of course that's not what that means at all. Today, Pence is giving a big speech to the Federalist Society. He is not going to flip off Donald Trump, but it will keep alive this growing schism in the Republican Party, and that's a good thing for us. So I'll stop there and see what you think about all this. My point is, we've got new juice for this year. We've been having trouble getting Biden's poll numbers up. He hasn't been given, we have an economy that grew, GDP grew by 5.6% last year. The number of people who give Biden credit for that is 35%. That's gotta end. The number of people who think Biden's managing COVID effectively is 42, 44%. We've got to improve those numbers. And the way we improve both numbers is to get out of this 2-year awful mask wearing, vaccine chasing, test chasing world that we've been in. And if we're out of that, or mostly out of it by July, that will help us a lot. But as you've heard my point, the committee, the lawsuits, the charges against Trump, the law closing in on him, and the schism are all nothing but a good time. It's a good, bad time, as you know.
Yeah.
I mean, talking about the electoral joys of somebody having tried a coup against the government of the United States is not a great thing. It's an awful thing. It just happens that it's an awful thing that we survive. This talk about how we're heading toward a civil war or heading toward a further coup attempt in 2024 is crap. Don't listen to that. Why would that be? Joe Biden's the president. There's gonna be a federal government that allows a coup. It's silly stuff. And civil wars are when people mount armies against each other. You really think that the National Guard or the U.S. Army is going to turn against the sitting president and support Republican challenger in 2024 and take arms in the streets? It's ridiculous.
Hey, the jobs numbers were very good today.
Is it? What is it?
It was 400, I can't remember, 400,000.
Oh,
It was
that's
like
good.
3 times what was projected.
That's good.
So that was good news this morning.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Questions or thoughts on my thesis, which is we're getting all new juice on from the other side.
Laura,
Yeah. What do you think about, excuse me, I just saw the headline. I haven't had a chance to read the article, but the Republican National Committee's stance that the insurrection was a legitimate political discourse. That seems to me like a pretty good cudgel to use against corporations who want to donate to the Republican Party. What do you think about that?
Well, when it started, and there's 3-4 groups that have been trying to keep corporates. It started out with a whole bunch of corporates saying, this could unravel America, we're not playing. And then Kevin McCarthy went back to those folks and said, if we ever control power again, you are so in trouble. So that's what has made corporates start giving to the party and to Republicans again. But it still has been a pretty strong statement from companies, and it's just a movement that needs to be attended to all year long. I think even within the organized the Republican National Committee, there's some unhappiness about the financial dealings with Trump. That's, as you know, I think that's Romney's cousin, Rodney McDaniel. Anyway, those, yeah, I don't think people care that much that it's the organized Republican Party, but there's any number of Republican leaders would like Trump to be somebody that they can pretend did things like they're saying in Ronald Reagan, and they would like him to be a footnote. Other questions or comments on this side? You could ask Cynthia Schick instead. She's the go-to person on the island on these matters.
all right.
Tom Kilborn.
Yeah, the business has always been in the pocket of the Republican Party, and they don't have any place else to go. So, trying to get them to be, less vehement about what Trump's doing, it to me doesn't seem to be doable. The other thing, on Biden's popularity numbers, the Republican Party has always had, unlimited amount of money to spend. They do better on publicity and promoting whatever they want to promote. And now they're promoting that Biden's not doing a good job. We being the Democrats, have never had the money to compete. And that is, you see that, I think, when you see those numbers.
Well, that is the legendary story for sure, but we spent, even as we opposed dark money, we had more dark money last November than they did. That is money that's outside of the campaign finance reporting system. With regard to corporations, I think absolutely, if you're a CEO of a corporation who's thinking about the marginal corporate tax rate, you're not thinking which Democratic senators should I go sweet talk. on the other hand, they know Biden is president till 2024, and they have the tax bill has got to be revised before then, because the individual tax rates expire, but have to be renewed. So there's an uncommon amount of leverage that Democrats have with regard to the tax bill. Manchin mentioned it the other day because he wants the corporate tax rate to go, marginal rate to go up 4%, which Kristen Sinema hasn't agreed to. So what you're saying is usually the case, but a little less so this specific minute because of when they need the tax bill to be rewritten, and also the emergence of techie companies who play it a little bit differently than the mainline companies. There's still plenty of corporations who will not give money to those 150 Republican congressmen. But as you would say, Tom, they could figure out lots of other ways to give to Republicans, even if they don't give to those specific campaigns. There's a little wiggle room, a little hedge, betting they're hedging it a little bit. What we need, of course, is finance reform, and we need to act like you go back to Will Rogers. I'm not a member of any organized political party. I'm a Democrat. We can always stand to do better in how we communicate. Obviously, the classic is whoever thought it was good for any Democrat to utter the words on defund the police should be we should talk to them about that. And you notice Biden yesterday when he was with Eric Adams in New York said, fund the police. Obviously, we got a lot of police reform to do, but that was an awful thing for us to be associated with. The words, not police reform themselves. I want to go on to my third theme. Are there other questions, thoughts, concerns?
Cynthia? Oh, you need to unmute, hon. There you go.
Just a quick one. I'm just all smiles about all this update. I think this is a lot of hopeful stuff. And as far as his approval rate and the accomplishment of, the perceived accomplishment of the GDP growing by 5.6%, I didn't hear you mention anything about this perception and deathly fear of impending inflation, and how might that fit into the approval story, especially if I'm talking to someone who is convinced that he's no good. Joe Biden.
Well, I think if I was a Republican strategist, I would have inflation be a talking point, a big talking point. So the first line of defense against that is, luckily, it's not Trump's talking point, at least, which is stop the steal. But I think, there's a lot of economists who basically said when we were doing the American Jobs Plan and the American Rescue Plan, that they would not be inflationary, or that the Federal Reserve would be able to handle it if they weren't inflationary. And I think there's a lot of things that go into the fact right now that, as you know, inflation is caused by demand exceeding supply. So sometimes it exceeds supply, not if you put money into the rescue plan because you had to, so that people would be able to eat, and you gave them some money from the federal treasury, which over time has influenced demand. The problem is, of course, Omicron and so forth have had world supply chain problems, have receded the supply, and therefore the inflation has emerged more than the Fed expected to. But now that we've revisited that, we're still we're the party of inflation for this year. We certainly are. And what we have to see is the Fed handling it well, and whether it people who, I don't know how many voters there are that would blame Democrats for inflation, but certainly some independent voters would, and that's our disadvantage.
Thank you.
Doesn't mean that those two bills are what did it, but it means we would not be able to prove that it wasn't. Obviously, they were two things we had to do that contributed to demand at a time when supply hasn't kept up. If we can just get supply moving some more, that would depend upon the end of the pandemic, then that gap will close and prices should flat by fall, hopefully. Charlie.
Yeah, I think another aspect to the inflation picture is the fact that there's been labor shortages, and if you're running a business like a grocery store, then typically you've got to pay more for your labor, which in turn means you have to figure out a way to raise cover the costs. And so I think it's an interesting sort of, there's some cause and effect parts of the picture there that are kind of interesting. And in a way, you know, if inflation is caused by the fact that people are getting paid more, then I'm not sure that's entirely a bad thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so we're talking about inflation of prices of for people who buy gas and so forth. And then we're talking about an inflation of wages that was long overdue, where we're getting finally an adjustment of real wages, even adjusted for inflation, that is being caused by certain people staying at home with their kids during the pandemic or otherwise not going back to the workforce. So we're getting that. But of course, if you have to pay your worker X dollars more, then that might cause you to increase the price on your product. So that, of course, is a relationship of the two. But as at least politically, what Charlie said is absolutely right. Not everybody in the world is going to be so unhappy that real wages will increase like 5% in this year. It's overdue. And it is also true that inflation helps certain kinds of people, like people who have cash, and hurts people who are unlimited, who are on dedicated income sources of restricted income with no meaningful chance of that income growing, fixed incomes.
Right.
So we've got 15 more minutes. I want to call out Democrats for some errors. So the good news about Democrats, one of the good news about Democrats, what were we worried about last year? We were worried about progressives and liberals being in a pitch battle, which would have been awful and would have been stupid, since in any one issue, you can't necessarily tell who the liberal is and who the progressive is, other than every time Joe Manchin says $2 trillion, Bernie says 6 trillion, 8 trillion, but those have been very restrained battles. The reason they've been restrained is out of respect for Joe Biden being president. They want to have 50 senators this fall. They want to elect a president, and they know that pitched battles are not good. So they're not having pitched battles even now, because they think Manchin's still going to do a deal that might be only 1 trillion, but they want him to do that deal. And if they have Bernie hammering him every day, he won't. So Biden will ask Bernie not to hammer him. The second thing comes from our hometown out in South Seattle, is Pramila Jayapal, who used to run One America, which was an immigrant rights organization, who's the leader of the Progressive Caucus, and who decided to play it somewhat differently than AOC would if she were the leader of the caucus. So that means she's a behind the scenes negotiator. That's very interesting. But she's got that caucus under her, and she doesn't want a daily war between progressives and liberals. She wants to go into Joe Biden's office and have Joe Biden say, this is what I can do and how I can do it if you help me. And she wants that to work. That's also a function of what a limited majority Nancy Pelosi has, because before the last election, she had seats to burn. Now that it's so close, it tends to get your warring sides closer together. Three things that we've done that are awful. When we did the Supreme Court, as you know, the Supreme Court ruling was that Biden could mandate vaccines for health workers, for institutions that get Medicare and Medicare. And that's been, the court ruled 5-4, just barely that they could do that. And then they overturned the ruling on major employers. During those oral arguments, Elena Kagan said 100,000 children had been seriously ill, many on ventilators. And the number of children that have been hospitalized is 3,400. We have to be scared for our children. We have to protect our children. We have to tell the truth about our children, and we cannot have liberals argue false numbers before the Supreme Court. Secondly, one of the things that's holding up, that held up Build Back Better, was that when we did the child tax credit, we gave some tax relief to people all the way up to $300,000 a year. We have got, when we hand out things for needy Americans, there is no argument that somebody making $250,000 is a needy American. We need, when we're going to be munificent, we need to means test our munificence. We know how to do that. The reason why they didn't do that is they like to pass bills that help all of their voters. But I'm sorry, Joe Manchin is right to call them out on that. They did a wonderful thing with the child tax credit. It's reduced poverty by 30% or so, child poverty, and they reached too far because they could. And we need some Democratic leadership that doesn't do that. And now we got some Democrats, mostly from the East Coast, that are crying crocodile tears over the state and local tax credit. As you remember, we used to get to deduct our state and local taxes, and when we itemized. And I'm not saying that wasn't a good time. I'm saying that it's a regressive tax. The people that benefits are the people who are itemizing, who pay a lot of state and local taxes. If you put that tax break back in, which certain Democratic congressmen want, some senators, what you're doing is you're forgetting that about wealth distribution in America. It's maldistributed. Poor people are too poor, rich people are too rich, and putting us back into the tax code, letting us deduct state and local taxes is a regressive measure. And we should be writing congressmen on our side and say, excuse me, did you forget about tax reform? So occasionally Democrats do things. We always remember that. It's just easy to give them sainthood up against the vagaries of the other side. So while we're in power, sort of, with our 50 votes, let's hold our own elected representatives responsible for doing sensible things for our country. And so we have 8 minutes left. That's my point 3. Do we have questions, insults, thoughts, concerns about any of these 3 matters?
Anybody? Oh,
Yes.
Lawrence.
Lawrence.
This just came on my phone, David, as a news flash that the RNC has censored Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, and they're calling January 6th a legitimate political discourse.
That is, good news about that, on the second part of that, is Americans got to watch it on TV. So it's good. It's pretty hard to make that claim. I mean, there's just enough film to not be able to make that claim. And 700 people have been charged, so they won't prevail. It was very interesting that Lindsey Graham chose this moment to disagree with the president, the ex-president. The ex-president said he would pardon those people, or might, if they're, because they've been treated unfairly. And Lindsey Graham said, "Oh no," and then Trump called him names. So it's interesting to see that the new discourse in the Republican Party is whether that was people visiting their capital for discourse. There wasn't a lot of discourse going on inside the Capitol on that day, as the films show. It shows that the Republican National Party will do anything, say anything. The Liz Cheney thing is interesting. She's got a lot of money. She could win in Wyoming, even though she wasn't such a great congressman. We should want her to do that. There's 10 Republicans that voted for impeachment, and we should want some of them to win. 3 of them have retired. Jamie Herrera Butler, I haven't checked on that lately, is down from Clark County, and she's got a challenger. She could win. She was able to beat our candidate soundly last fall. She could absolutely win. Other comments in our last minutes? It's an
Well, thanks
exciting.
for sharing that screen, Reed. That
He's-
Romney
he's-
comment.
Yes, both Romney and Bill Kristol are
What did-
making noise about how this is a bad move.
What did Romney say?
He said it brings shame on the party to vilify these people.
That's his niece or his niece-in-law. So
I know, it's,
there goes Thanksgiving dinner, I guess. I once had an uncle who wouldn't speak to me at Thanksgiving because I had a beard, but in those days, a beard meant you were against the Vietnam War. So the
there's the quote. Shame falls on a party that would censure persons of conscience.
wow. You know, the thing with Mitt and a lot of the rest of them, if they would just be consistent in their resistance, so it's like they're taking turns. Mike Rounds one day, Mitt, occasionally Blunt of Missouri will say something. And if they all would on one day, you could believe that there were a party that had some guts. But then they find reasons to. My favorite is Barrasso, who's the number 3rd Republican, did not publicly defend Mike Rounds, John Thune. Mitch said, "I agree with everything Mike Rounds said." So that's nice. But they'll put somebody out there to sound the conscience alarm, and then that person will go hide for a couple more months. And that's too bad.
It is.
I would
Tom,
like-
did you have a comment? Tom?
No, thanks.
Okay.
Debbie Howyer, I haven't seen you lately. Are you
I
there?
know, there's Debbie.
Laura's got a question.
Oh, hi, Laura. There you
Oh,
go.
hi. Yeah, Bonnie pointed out that Senator Lujan is going to be gone for 4 to 6 weeks. Does that mean nothing can get voted on for 4 to 6 weeks?
So
Or is that in the plan?
they'll there's other people quarantined, so they'll be careful. He's a key vote on the Commerce Committee, which is the committee Maria Cantwell chairs. So it means that certain things of high sensitivity will wait, but he's a young man, so hopefully he'll be fine. And that's a Democratic governor. If there was ever a vacancy, we'd still be fine.
Hey, Debbie, you want to say something?
Yes, please. Hello,
Yes,
everyone. Thank
hi.
you, Stin, for tuning me into today's event. Hi, David and everyone else. I haven't been following the COVID Relief Fund process. And is that coming to an end? Has it been brought to an end? I was just so discouraged to hear about the abuse Of course, anytime we have these things, we see this happening. But the, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars that are going out to these people buying Maseratis and so on, because they have reaped the benefit of being reimbursed by for their so-called testing companies who have not provided any or have failed to provide test results to huge numbers of people that they've been processing for. Anyway,
Well, Bob Ferguson filed a lawsuit yesterday, and that one testing company has been shut down, locations across the country, including 10 here. But I mean, anytime you have a huge federal investment effort, you're going to have some fraud, and certainly in Washington State, you couldn't get anybody more aggressive than Ferguson. I'm certain it's true in Department of Justice. I don't know beyond that, Debbie. It is discouraging to see how certain Americans act during troubled times. There was there was another question.
Tom?
Thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking about that January 6th committee and the fact that it doesn't seem like, they're making much progress. Nobody's been, or not many have been punished, or, what they're actually accomplishing. And I think that plays into the hands of the Republicans who are saying, it was insignificant. Unless you get some action out of that committee, it makes it look like what is the significance? I think that's a problem.
That's a great thing to have Democrats disagree with each other. They've issued 70 subpoenas. They're doing exactly what they should be. In terms of people being prosecuted, they don't have those powers. That's Department of Justice. So they issue subpoenas and fight for the subpoenas to be enforced. And they've got a year to drill deep and to produce evidence that the Justice Department can use. The subpoenas fall into the insurrection itself, to broader areas of fraud like seizing voting machines, and to 15 subpoenas that are about false electors and fraudulent electors. So I think I'm not disappointed with it at all. With regard to how many conspiracy charges and others being brought by the Department of Justice, I don't know. I do know that Merrick Garland's saying he'll do whatever, he'll go wherever the evidence takes him, is code for I will charge the President of the United States if I feel like I can sustain a charge. So I feel like it's going like it should. I don't feel any of your disharmony over the committee. I think it's a blessing that Kinzinger and Cheney went on it. If it was all Democrats, I think that would be too bad. The good news of the committee is, unlike so many other congressional investigations, the subpoena power will hold. And that means that federal prosecutors can charge and jail people for failing to comply with those subpoenas. And that will get somebody's attention. Anytime you go to see your attorney and say, I don't want to testify, and they say, well, they can put you in jail, that tends to heighten the senses.
But I think we have to look at the election coming up, this year. I think all of this can be used as fodder in that, in the campaigns. And that's what scares me. I think, progress has to be visible some way.
Well, I think it is. I'm not saying you shouldn't be scared. It's a scary time. So right now, if the election was held today, I don't think we necessarily would get 50 senators. It's interesting, though, where they're running, because remember, Pennsylvania, we won the governorship by 700,000 votes. We'll probably get Toomey's seat. It's whether we can hold on to Mark Kelly in Arizona and Warnock in Georgia, we could well win Ohio with Tim Ryan. We could win North Carolina. We could beat Ron Johnson. We won that state. We could beat Ron Johnson in Wisconsin. Kilbane's right. Be worried, be very worried, be especially worried that the resistance seems to be sleepy right now. But Debbie, do you still have an indivisible group in Winslow or in Bainbridge Island, or is that not meeting right now?
Hello, it's not an indivisible group. It's called Kitchen Table Activists. And we have not met formally over the pandemic in small groups as people have felt that safety. So there's a lot of ripples that have gone out through the group and individual projects being taken on. As you know, Sin has been one of those members continuing to do that work. And so we're, really working at an individual basis. But yeah, it is a crucial time, 2022. We thought 2020 was, and 2016, and so on and so forth. But yeah, we're good contacts for anyone interested in banding together. Also, I'm a precinct committee officer and stepped down from the chairmanship recently. But that's another route that anyone interested in becoming a precinct committee officer for the LD23 Dems. There are a lot of open precincts also here on Bainbridge. Anyway, lots of opportunities for getting together and working together.
Also, I've seen a lot of people, a lot of Islanders work for Common Power, which used to be Common Purpose. Common Purpose that used to be Common Power. That's out of Seattle, and they do work in 12 states or so. If anybody's there's a lot of postcard projects around you could join. Domke's project, Common Power, is just a very dramatic, extensive campaign effort. So we'll be done. We'll see you in another month.
Yes, you'll be
wood.
with us. We really appreciate it, David. And thank you all so much for being with us
Thank
today.
you.
The sun is shining. Get out there and
Yeah.
enjoy it while we can.